Hello, folks. Welcome to another episode of Wu Says. This is where we get real about the US, China, and everywhere and everything in between. It's two superpowers, one global story. Now, Trump's sweeping new tariffs are now in effect, and the overall average tariff rate for the US is now at its highest in almost a century. So, how should we understand the scale and significance of this? I'm Melisa Idris, and joining me to unpack all of this is Professor Thye, who has been studying US-China relations long before tariffs became headline news. So, Prof. Wu, talk to me a little bit about this. The Financial Times called it the dawn of a new trade order and the end of an old one. And I'm quite curious to know what you think of that. Do you agree with that? Is this an important turning point for the for global trade, for the global economy?
It is definitely a turning point in the global economy. It will mean there's no more free trade with the United States. The important question is, would there be continued free trade among the other countries? In other words, if the United States imposes such insists on collecting tariffs on goods entering the country, the important question is, how should the other countries operate trade among themselves? Yes, it could either be a bifurcated world. In other words, dealing the US, you pay tariff, trading among ourselves, it is the WTO system. Or is it likely that we will just start putting tariffs on each other? And it is the second, then it is not only the beginning of a new world order, it's also the beginning of the decline in global prosperity.
So some of these tariffs, I think the tariffs hit more than 90 countries. And Malaysia is one of them. So I'm curious to know how you see Malaysia's deal, because we had negotiated the tariffs from 25% to 19%. But in that trade negotiation, there was a lot of give and a lot of take as well. So how do you see it? Did Malaysia get a good deal?
Well, we got a deal that Trump has arbitrarily benchmarked to Indonesia. Indonesia, as you know, more than a week before us, got a 19%, together with the demand that Indonesia opens up its many of its agricultural markets, and to buy airplanes from Boeing. In the case of Malaysia, we also have 19%, and we just placed an order for 30 more planes from Boeing on top of the 23 that we had ordered before. And we are going to be taking a new look at the import of halal food from the United States. Malaysia has had quite stringent restrictions on the import of food because of the halal content, halal procedure requirement. And the Americans have now argued that they're just as good in dishing out halal food as we are. And furthermore, the negotiations are not all done yet, because there are still negotiations on certain deregulatory steps that are not specified. One thing that the Americans have not insisted on is the amendment of government procurement procedures, because right now the government's procurement practices tends to favor a particular community over other providers, which means that it shuts out the Americans as well as some other communities in Malaysia. This is a red line that I think Anwar talked about, and which the Americans have chosen not to demand concessions on. But This is, you got to understand, the Philippines also got 19%. So has Cambodia. So has Thailand. So the 19% is clearly a line they drew up for this group of potentially, these are important countries for U.S. strategic consideration. So we will treat them quite uniformly.
Okay. So
Vietnam is 20%.
Right. There seems to be, as you said, almost like a benchmark, right? When Indonesia got its deal, you said that now the rest of the region has a benchmark of what to ask for. But the tariff rate is just one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is how much each country is willing to give up for that 19%. So you talked a little bit about Indonesia's agriculture. I'm not sure what the Philippines got, but in terms of Malaysia, what we negotiated, and you said negotiations are not done yet. So is there a likelihood that we will have to keep compromising or buying more or giving up more ground to make sure that we don't lose this 19% tariff?
Well, I talk about regulatory changes, like, for example, halal and buying airplanes. That's one more thing. The Americans want you to invest in their country. And what does the investment mean? It could be as simple as just buy U.S. government bonds because of the tremendous U.S. deficit that is coming. Trump has just cut taxes. That's going to send its deficits soaring skyward. So what's the implication for U.S. interest rates? So now he has a commitment from most of the trading partners that you will come invest in the United States. So one may have the impression investment means that you build a production facility. That is one. The other one is you buy U.S. debt and keep our interest rate low. So now the question you asked is very good. Is this the end of U.S. demands? The tariff is being used more on an increasing amount of, as an instrument for an increasing number of U.S. objectives. For example, in order to discourage India from buying petrol from Russia, India now has a tariff of 50%.
Yeah.
And to discourage Lula of Brazil from making BRICS stronger and hence presenting a more united front to the United States, and furthermore, to tell Lula that you should be more tolerant of Trump-like characters in your country. We want you to be soft on the trial of Bolsonaro. Brazil has been punished with a 50% tariff rate. We could see that the tariff is being used for more than just addressing what Donald Trump says to be trade imbalances. In other words, if you don't bend to our will, we will put restrictions on your ability to access the US market.
Right.
Like the South Koreans are being told, you have to pay us more for the fact that we are stationing troops in South Korea as part of the trade negotiation. So it has become an instrument of US policy in general.
Prof, do you think, isn't this holding the world hostage? I mean, do you think that the world will bend to what Trump wants? Is this essentially a shakedown for US interests?
It's a shakedown in very general terms. To take him at his face value, that the role of the tariff is to reduce US trade deficits and to bring jobs back to the United States, is to think that there's more of a pattern to Donald Trump's, more rationality to Donald Trump's thinking than there really is. Because look, he even put a 25%, or is it? Yeah, 25% tariff on copper entering the United States. How is that bringing industrial jobs back to the United States? It is basically encouraging the expansion of copper mining in the United States. And that is certainly not manufacturing jobs. And the United States has allowed Nippon Steel to acquire US Steel, which is the last remaining large steel producer in the United States. In order for US Steel to do that, no, in order for Nippon Steel to do it, Nippon has to give the United States a golden share. No, let me think of what the right word is. Basically, the United States government gets to be a co-investor in the firm. Just like NVIDIA will have to pay, this was announced a few hours ago, NVIDIA and Advanced Micro Devices will now pay 15% of its sales of chips to China. So it's a shakedown of its own companies too. And why? Because the US budget deficit has just been greatly increased by the big, beautiful bill that Donald Trump has bamboozled the US Congress to pass.
Okay, so when you talk about this, this objective of Trump wanting to bring jobs and manufacturing back to America, one of the ways he said he wanted to do that was through threatening a tariff of 100% on imports of semiconductors. But it won't apply for companies that are setting up shop in the US, right? Or have committed to do so. Do you think this is a wise move? I mean, economically speaking, will the strategy work in bringing jobs and manufacturing back to America? I remember you talking about there are more structural issues at play here than just having companies invest in America.
Well, it is unlikely that it will be able to attract the low value added chips back to the United States, largely because that's extremely labor intensive. And the Americans would not be able to produce it, even if there is 100% tariff on imported chips. But what is unknown is how about existing operations that US multinationals have set up in foreign countries, like Penang, Malaysia. All of that is unknown. And let's see what the shakedown of that will be. It is very unfortunate that almost every week a new demand comes up. And the issue is, how long will it take the rest of the world, especially the rest of the West, which is basically think of the OECD, or think of the G7 minus the United States. When will they decide that if the United States continues to behave this way, will they therefore mobilize the rest of the world to act in defense of free trade? The question is, would they ever be able to get together? And as we have seen, it has been quite hard, largely because most of the Western European countries would naturally be spearheading such rest of the world team up is that they are dependent on the U.S. security umbrella against Russia. So they will continue to put up with it until the costs become too heavy. And I think that it should be a process that should hurry up, that the rest of the West should reach out to what I call the rest of the global South. The global South should really be split into two parts. What we see as the global South now should be divided into the global East, which is China and the Soviet Union, and the rest you could call the true global South. And the West, as we know, if you minus the United States, is what we call the rest of the West. Now, if there can ever be an alliance of the rest of the global South and the rest of the West, that would be the only time when the United States would not be in a position to be the bully that keeps on ratcheting up its list of demands. It's very worrying because national security has become used in a very capricious manner, the objective, in order to extort the world. And I think all of this could be settled in a less damaging manner. The world is heading towards an economic cliff. If you look at businesses all over the world, with such arbitrary appearances of tariff, investors certainly holding back on putting their money down on anything. The only thing that they are not holding back on putting money down is in AI investments. And if you look at the stock market boom that's going, it's not because of optimism from the tariff. There's definitely pessimism from the tariff, but it's because of AI. Now, the question is, would AI be able to continue powering the world through this collapse in investment in all the other activities?
Wow. That's a really interesting point. I do feel like there's a disconnect between what's happening with the stock market and the global uncertainty with business sentiment around the world. You said that you don't think this is going to be the end, that you don't think this is going to be settled, that there will be more and more demands coming from the US going forward. So can I then ask you, what do we do with this information at this point in time when we know for the only certainty we know is that there will be more uncertainty going forward? So are you looking out for anything that will form your opinions? What are your data points that you're looking at in terms of where this is going to be headed over the next few months?
I think that the next few months, as I say, we're still negotiating with the United States over Malaysian deregulation. At some point, the standard would be restrictions on Chinese investments in Southeast Asia and restrictions on economic integration into the Chinese economic sphere. This, I think, is almost inevitable given the importance of U.S. geostrategic concern. And there is no doubt there is an explicit objective to contain China. And we in the neighborhood are not only economic partners of China, we are also potentially allies of China in a part of the world which right now is very pro-US. And the desire would be to consolidate that military alliance, in which it will be a very sorry day for the world, not only just for China and Southeast Asia, when we'll be forced to make a choice of access to the US market in exchange for our reduction in economic relations with China. And this is where we have to be able to act as a group to say, we'll be friends to both sides. And this will require ASEAN unity. And that alone would not be enough, because ASEAN is actually quite 700 million people, but it would even be more effective if we have Western Europe, Japan, and Korea standing with us, which, as I've said before, a hard thing to do to mobilize the rest of the world. But seeing what lies ahead, which is that we should cut our economic ties with China, what would that do to us? It would certainly make us poorer. It would be better for the whole world, including for the United States, for Malaysia, Western Europe, China, and Korea to maintain a neutral position with respect to both countries.
All right. Well, Prof. Wu, thank you so much for breaking that down for us and getting real about what's happening in the US, China, and everywhere and everything in between. So thank you so much. And that's it from this episode of Wu Says. I'm Melisa Idris, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye, folks.